Today, we are discussing governance, identity, and privilege access, and why cybersecurity risk is often caused not by missing tools, but by a lack of structure. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted with SST, the LinkedIn live show where we deep dive into the real, unfiltered world of IT, cybersecurity, and business technology. Brought to you by SST, we're here to cut through the noise, share expert insights, and tackle the challenges shaping the future of managed IT services. Live, raw, and unscripted. Today we have Bo Elson and Ryan Gallenberg from Team SST joining the conversation. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being here today.
Good to be here.
Yeah. And both these gentlemen work directly with organizations that are improving cybersecurity posture while managing complex technology worlds. So I guess just to oversight of what we're going to be talking about here today with you guys, really why governance is becoming a leadership priority, why identity has become the new foundation of cybersecurity, and then really how organizations reduce risk through maybe things like privilege access control. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. We don't have a lot of time here today. So to kick the conversation off, either one of you, I guess when organizations talk about cybersecurity, the conversation usually begins with tools. Like I need this EDR, or I need to implement this particular thing to increase security across different applications. But really, we're seeing with our customers, right? We're seeing a shift where leadership is asking more about like governance and controls and these kinds of things. Either one of you, what is driving this change, this mindset change?
Yeah, I mean, I think tools are pretty commonplace, whether you're talking about a company's internal IT or in the MSP space especially. Like everyone's got a tool for something. Like there's usually some holes. If we like take over an organization from someone else, we're usually surprised by, oh, they didn't have this or they didn't have that, but usually they have something in place. And identity, there are tools that cover identity, but it really starts from the ground up with access, and managing that layer, because you can monitor the identities, but if the wrong person gets into the wrong account, they can very quickly change permissions to where the tools might be like the delay between the tool recognizing the change and blocking it. It might be too late if there's too many accounts in the organization with too widespread of access.
Yeah. I guess you play off that. Go ahead.
So kind of elaborating a little on what Ryan was saying. It's kind of like you have the tools out there and they think that's providing all the protections. Meanwhile, like we walk in a customer environment and nobody's looked at how many like global admins in the Microsoft environment, or they have local admin permissions, and it's just kind of eroded to that overnight, like, hey, they ran into an issue, somebody didn't have access. Well, the easy thing is go give them more access and not figure out, because you don't want to prevent their workflow, or something important was going on. And then it erodes a little bit more and a little bit more. And oftentimes people don't just stop and look and see like, okay, what access is needed out there? Are these accounts still needed? They kind of grow and it gets bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden, kind of some of the environments we've seen is, there's like everybody's admin, right? And it's just because some security was set up and somebody created something and nobody stopped and said, okay, how does this need to be set up? Are these accounts set up right? Who needs access to what? And so those kind of conversations are really important to make sure it's the right people with the right access to those systems.
Yeah, and I mean, tools are really powerful when it comes to like external threats, detecting those. But I mean, a risk for organizations is internal threats, people having access to data that they're not supposed to, or employee who's about to leave or knows that they're probably on the way out. Like those kind of threats, a tool usually isn't going to detect that type of activity, because the things that they're doing are going to look legitimate because they're within the system. They're accessing through approved methods, approved devices. They have their MFA, like they're getting into the system, and then what access do they have within there? Is that being checked? So like a lot of the time, number one, like I don't think there's been a single onboarding that we've done where there isn't at least like 5 or so accounts that are just like, we don't really know
They
what those
really
are
need
for,
this?
or
Yeah.
we used to use that for this, but we don't anymore. And also, like Bo was saying with the domain admin, like a lot of people don't realize, oh, we gave them domain admin so they can install stuff on their computers. But domain admin also means that they can get into every single file share. And they're like, well, they shouldn't be able to get into the accounting one or the HR one. And those are the things that no tool is going to detect. It just doesn't exist. Like that's where an audit comes in and really getting nitty gritty with the permissions on accounts.
Let me ask you this. So when we are engaging with leadership, it seems like they are asking the question, is my investment in my tools really reducing my risk, right? And I feels like the requirements that cybersecurity insurance is putting out there now is one of the things is driving leadership to be a little bit more thoughtful around what their environments are like instead of just throwing software tools and hardware appliances at it. They're asking, is this really enough? Because it ultimately isn't, right? I mean, do you have anything to add to that?
Like certainly like the cyber insurance questionnaires are prompting leadership to ask more questions and make sure they have a proper tool set. But I also think, during those, like the onboarding discussions, when we're going in there and kind of trying to figure out what exactly is set up and just kind of verifying access, that has a lot of conversations too. So it's both of those, right? It's one, having a tool set to correctly, monitor what's happening in environment at different levels, from a network, from a firewall, from user logins to cloud access, application access. You need to have some visibility in the environment, but then you also have to audit and see, okay, what did we just allow people to have access to? Like Ryan said, where it becomes, tools aren't going to find it because it's normal use access. Like and that's what the bad guys are going to look like too. They're going to try to get access to those same control or same accounts that have all of this elevated access, and boy, then that potential footprint of a compromise significantly bigger.
So it's not only the cyber insurance application process, but also our onboarding process. And I mean, obviously, because of our alignment to CIS, is driving these deeper conversations. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah. These are conversations that, early on when we're onboarding with customers, we kind of sequentially go through some of those CIS controls, at least up through control 6, looking at, just getting inventories, around the application software data, 1, 2, and 3. And then, you have secure configurations in CIS control 4, but then really spending some time around those controls 5 and 6, which are, the accounts and then the user permissions, and using like group permissions and revisiting, do they have MFA? What kind of access? What groups are they in? And making sure that stuff's set in place with those proper access controls. So that's where I think it helps from a leadership perspective. Like when we're onboarding, we have those discussions, and a lot of the security isn't, just making sure you have like 25 tools in your environment. Like certainly you need to make sure you have enough coverage of tools to do what you need to do and what you're trying to protect. But it's also just making sure, what do you have connected out there? What software are you using? Who has access to that? And revisiting and making sure it's intentional with how you have things set up provides significant security benefits as well.
Yeah, like I think as far as time invested into our onboardings go, like the tool deployment is a fraction of the time that we put in as opposed to actually going through and auditing all the systems. So like the tools are out there within the first week, maybe even the first day in some cases, and they're doing their job, but a lot of the work is around digging into the systems, auditing those accounts. And maybe the tools check the box for cybersecurity insurance, but it's way better to never have to use the cybersecurity insurance because you did the extra work to make sure that, well, the account that got compromised didn't have access to do way more damage than like before the tool caught it.
That's interesting. So you're suggesting that the tools are equally as important as the governance and policy review and all that, like not more important.
Yeah, I wouldn't say more important. They definitely go hand in hand. Like if you're just doing one or the other, you're doing better than nothing. But like you really need the combination. If you're just going through auditing accounts, but the wrong account gets access still, like, and there's nothing preventing it from spreading, then you're in a bad place. If you have the tool, but the tool can't detect it because it's either an insider threat or it's just like a newly seen attack or something, then without the permission control on those accounts and what they can access, then you're bad in that way too.
Mhm. Yeah. So basically, what you guys have been talking about then, if I to restate this, if I were to restate this, is when we're talking about governance, we're talking about consistency around identity, authentication, and access policies, and really managing that with intent rather than just being okay with technology evolving and growing into this endless blob.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's a, you know, like I think we talk about this before. If like technology now in most organizations have been used for some time, and without that intentionality of just like knowing what systems are being used, who uses what, and how important that is to the business, like is a really important thing. And that's the identity is like the core of it. Knowing who the people are, what systems they access, like if you have that laid out, then a lot of the rest of the stuff becomes a lot easier to secure because you know what people should have. And it's easy
Yeah.
for us to make configuration changes and plan to shore up the gaps because there's usually gaps out there, but it's staying on top of it, making sure, like when we see it a lot, like switching service providers, going from one, and it's like, well, this account was related to two service providers that they dealt with ago, and they're still a domain admin. That account's been sitting out there the whole time. Like that stuff needs to be taken care of on a timely manner, and it's just going through and revisiting what is this account? Do you know what this is used for? Some of it is they may not know. We got to go do some investigation and figure out how that stuff is used, but without having a process and going through and verifying that, and then being able to have those conversations with the customer of, hey, this is what we found, these are some gaps, you can really shore up their security practice, just making sure those accounts are set up with the right permissions.
Yeah. I mean, that's the segue into the segment too, right? You already, like jumped right into it. And I think us to talk about identity for all the things we've already mentioned is super important because it is kind of considered like the new security perimeter, right? It's the new area of focus. Tools have been, like it's been a thing, part of conversation for many years. Really, there's just this lack of discussion around governance specifically to identity. Like just for example, talk about how common it is to have a lot of users still active for employees that are no longer with the company. Like that's a very, very common thing. And how easy would that to be to have a policy and have some process around offboarding to eliminate that threat?
Yeah. Do you want to speak on that?
That'd be good.
So yeah, I mean it's a pretty common one where we start to have those conversations when we're onboarding customers of like, hey, here's some accounts that were found there. Usually what we find is there's a process in place and people know what needs to be set up, but it's not always followed. It's not always communicated. And then that identity might be cleaned up in one system and not the next, where you have these like different identities around there where, you have traditionally we have a local Active Directory or some sort of like on-premise identity system. In more and more, pretty much every customer, every company out there has some sort of cloud presence in a major cloud vendor like Google or Microsoft. And then they also have other core business applications that often these days are cloud-based as well. And so, it's not necessarily even, oh, we didn't get rid of those accounts. We see those accounts, now they're in one system and like they were left in another one, or this one, the tool to manage that identity didn't disable this one, or like permissions got changed on there. So it's kind of this like the fragmented identities become a problem too, but it's having that process and knowing, okay, we're offboarding. These are the 5 things that they get set up on because they have this role and this permission. Now we can verify, yes, they're cleanly removed from that. Or going through and taking the exercise where you're going to consolidate identities, right? We want to have one spot where we're managing these. So we don't have to worry about, did they get access to this, our ERP system that's cloud-based, and what security measures are on that one, like multi-factor and, what have you, versus their email and document. And then you have your local system maybe doing some other kind of production work. Do they have access to all those? Well, let's manage that in one identity, and let's figure out how we can, so we don't have to worry about this. Yeah, they're in this system and not this system, and suddenly we're reviewing, and it's just like, what they think is in place is truly not what's in place, because systems weren't managed to synchronize identities, if that was the case, or there wasn't a process. Different people are setting them up in different systems, and so suddenly it's kind of all over the board. So.
And a lot of the times, like SSO would solve a lot of those issues. So using one identity source, and like you're saying, we might not even have access to these systems as the IT provider because it's their applications. They're strictly business applications, and so there are identities out there that we probably don't even know about a lot of the times. And so the more we push for a single identity source, then it keeps all those clean because we keep that single identity source clean.
Mm-hmm.
And like Bo was saying, like, sometimes there's a process, maybe it's followed, maybe it's not, previously, but even us, like, we on a regular basis will go back and check the account list.
Mm-hmm.
So like there also needs to be follow-up, and that usually doesn't exist in companies.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a significant cost with this too, not only like from a security risk perspective, but just, managing these identities. Oftentimes we're seeing this with, a lot of our customers are just, in cloud identities, you need licensing for everything. It's all user-based, there's all subscriptions, and just making sure those user accounts are set up and licensed appropriately. Oftentimes we can reduce some expense to our customers. So there's a monetary value to this, not just lowering that cybersecurity risk. And the more systems that you can start integrating together with this identity, then you can manage those other systems as well. Like, hey, we see this quite a bit where you start to have some, they'll log in through an identity systems, but it's not true SSO. And so somebody just has their own license and somebody's using, and they don't even know what's sitting out there. So it's not just that identity, but then suddenly there's data out there in these other systems and they have no idea what's even being used. So it can really start to fragment, from who's got access to what. So like, that's where, when we're looking at introducing cybersecurity to customers, using that CIS framework where you're looking at the inventory of the hardware, the software, the data, and the accounts, then you have an idea of really what's out there and what needs to be protected.
Yeah, it's great. So if I were to sum that up, like a single identity source, SSO integrations to that identity source, MFA consistently across them when you can do so, all of that, it starts to create this visibility into this kind of uncharted waters, or like, where a lot of leaders maybe had blind spots or had no idea, really how exposed they were. But if we get to this single identity source with SSO, we really make that a much easier, cleaner environment to onboard, offboard, elevate privileges, all those things is what you're kind of suggesting.
Yeah, monitor and manage it, right? Because you don't have to monitor and manage all these disparate systems. You got one, right? And the security controls in place for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the entire security conversation just becomes a lot clearer when we have that source of truth and we follow that, and that is part of all of the processes we have around users on our network, right?
And that turns the work from reactive into proactive then too. You're not discovering accounts here and then discovering accounts there, reacting to someone access this system. It's all proactive processes on onboarding and offboarding that are being done.
And the tickets that from a customer who doesn't have, I'm trying to do my job and this doesn't work, I need this software, this needs to be set up for me. It's like, that stuff is just in place so people can do their jobs when they need to.
Mm-hmm. It's great. So like, we're kind of, we're 2/3 of the way through the show here. It's been great so far. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the user stuff. specifically around privilege access control, right? So we know administrative privileges are essential, but they also can be one of the biggest security risks to an organization. So what can a company do to reduce risks around privilege access control?
Yeah, I mean, this sometimes it's technology. You need some solutions in place that can handle some changes in doing some time based, but oftentimes it's just if you have a process in place and you understand what needs access and who needs access, you can head off a lot of that. So it's kind of a combination, I would say, of both, tools that can automatically handle some of that escalation and revoke it when needed. There's certainly, we use some of those within our just standard tool set that now when you need to do something, you can just submit a request. We get it pretty efficiently, can respond to it, make sure they can do what they need to, install an app, whatever, and then it can go back into that more restricted state so they can still do their job, but provide those protections that a normal user would have. So I don't.
Yeah, I can speak on that. So like in the past, before we were utilizing this tool, if a user needed to run an application as admin to do updates on a semi-frequent basis, we would kind of weigh the risks, and depending on the customer, maybe give them a local administrator access to that computer. With these like just-in-time administrator tools, we can either they request administrator access, we give it to them for the next hour in that application, or in some cases it does make sense to be like, this specific application can run in elevated mode if you try, and it'll elevate it for you, and then it'll de-elevate when it's done. But it also doesn't elevate the entire system. It elevates under that user's context only in that application for that application to do work. No other application has access. The user doesn't have local admin access to go change registry and devices and everything else on that computer. So,
so basically, the tools have gotten more mature around not removing privilege access, but actually managing it effectively. But if you don't have a process around how to use the tool isn't by itself going to help really fix this problem. Is that accurate?
yep. And with that too, like when we're onboarding this tool, we've had the option with some of our customers, they've been using it in the past and we're taking it on from another service provider. And we usually start from scratch because we don't know what they have set up for policies, how loose they were with their permissions. So that's where when we're going through, we kind of start from scratch, learn their environment, and make very, I would say, like educated and like risk-based choices as far as what we're going to allow. And like you can misuse those tools is the other thing. You can set up rules that are too loose or give people permissions for an unlimited amount of time on just their entire device. So like it's a double-edged sword. It can really be helpful, or you can, it all comes back down to like auditing and process, because if you don't follow those, you're opening up holes that way too.
Let me ask you this. How common is shared administrator accounts in organizations that we stumble into? Because I can see that being a very, obviously a massive risk. Is that fairly common?
We see those from time to time. In some of those too, like depending on the system and what it has access to, an admin to an application, global admin, like certainly there's times where those need to be leveraged. It's also making sure that, do you have MFA still enabled on there and a way for that to be enforced even in a shared environment? So there's things that you can do where you could still leverage shared accounts and keep a baseline of security. It does present some challenges, like when you're auditing and trying to understand who did what where. Certainly, the more you're tied to a user would be better. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's kind of even talking about this is not necessarily like privilege access control, but it's kind of third party access where those are shared accounts with some elevated permissions that just need to be sitting out there for indefinitely in case they have to reach out to support or they're managing and updating systems. Could be a computer system, could be another hardware device or something else within the environment. So there's some access needed there too that presents challenges. So making sure you have the right access control on those, that's becoming more and more prevalent. You're having more and more dependent systems that are sitting inside of the boundary of a network that you need to make sure that thing either, it not necessarily even like in a user account, but just what access can they reach within the network becomes something. But shared accounts, yeah, I mean, certainly not ideal, but sometimes they're kind of a necessary evil. You just need to make sure you have enough, the right security access on those and the controls like multi-factor and auditing of those so you can tell what's going on with those shared accounts.
Yeah, and I think what we see more often is just too many people with admin, like in cloud identities. The CIS recommended is four max. And through our process, we have our administrator account, 2 break glass accounts, and then that leaves 1 slot for the customer. And a lot of the times there'll be 2 or 3 or more admins in there. So we have to have a discussion like who really needs this administrator access. Like you can put in requests through us and we'll handle it. Like we usually want to have at least 1 user in there that has that access to their own technology. But usually only 1 because we want to hit that standard. And a lot of the times you'll ask someone if they want admin and they're like, nope. Yeah. I didn't even know I had that.
The other part with that too is making sure it's a separate admin account. So they're not logging on with just, Jane Doe using this and she's got admin rights, can log into the admin. It's I got to log in with a special admin account and make those changes when I'm just generally working. I'm in an account that's just a normal user.
Correct. We don't see that very often. I think we've maybe seen it once, and I think both accounts had admin access, so it wasn't really accomplishing anything.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, monitoring and managing identity, it greatly reduces organizations' exposure to credential-based attacks, but it also aligns very nicely with what the cyber insurance providers are looking for today.
Mm-hmm. And it does a lot more than just checking that box. It's actually reducing risk because
correct.
A lot of the tool is checking the box, but if you put that extra work in, you're gaining that much more peace of mind.
Yeah. So we're down to the wire here. We have about 3 minutes left, so we jump into what we call the lightning round. So I'm going to just throw some things out at you guys, maybe 2 or 3 items here. Can you give us like one sign that an organization lacks technology governance or even specifically identity governance?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of when you have those conversations and nobody knows who's got access to what and not even that of like there's really no thought into like they don't have a list of it and they haven't even thought that there should be some differentiation between who needs access to what.
Mm-hmm. Like a deer in the headlights when you ask those questions around identity.
Everybody's got access to everything and that's you look at file shares, you look at applications, like everybody's just got access to everything and they're probably all have elevated rights because they've never sat down to really plan out the role-based access and look at their data and look at their applications and okay, this is now intentional. Who needs access to what?
Mm-hmm. So on to the next one. So what would the first safeguard you implement to stabilize before buying anything new?
Probably identity, like reducing fragmentation of it so there's as little sources of identity as possible, and then it makes it that much more easy to manage and monitor.
Mm-hmm. This is one of the first things that we do. Actually, part of our onboarding now is like with the local identity and whatever cloud provider. Generally, we're seeing more Microsoft 365 consolidating those identities so we have one user account that they can log into their computer. It gets them access to the cloud, and then we can start building SSO on top of it. But when we can start to consolidate that stuff, pretty big security benefits and also a lot of workflow benefits for customers as well.
Mm-hmm. So we have just a little bit of time left here. The last one, the fastest way to create measurable security progress.
I mean, it's implementing cybersecurity through CIS controls is going to be, I would say, kind of holistically what we'd want to do, starting with inventories. Easy one to do is account inventory. Just starting, what are the user accounts that we need? Who needs access to what? kind of tying that to the hardware that you have and the data that you have really allows you to get that foundation of what we have, where our important stuff is, and who needs access to it.
Yeah, it's funny that we always go back to hardware inventory, software inventory, user inventory, right? How do you protect what you don't even know you have?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's kind of some, like when you're starting out with cybersecurity and we start having these first conversations with customers about like implementing cybersecurity, and it's about 2 or 3 meetings in when we're really going through what this is before we even start talking any tools. It's just about, it might be some hardware that's there. It's hey, here's somewhere, some systems where we're saving data and these locations are, and here's a bunch of user accounts that we have. Like, do you still need these user accounts, and what should they, like, what group should they be a member of, and what permission do they need? It's hours into the conversations about setting security in place before it comes into anything really technology driven with tools and any of that kind of stuff. It's just, you got to have the inventory, you got to know what you have before you can protect anything.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, hey, that's a wrap here for us today, fellas. Thanks again for joining us on Unscripted with SST. Security maturity doesn't come from more tools. It comes from structure, alignment, and measurable progress. Thanks for joining us on Unscripted with SST, and see you next time.
See you.